Hello, I'm Chauncey Lennon from the Lumina Foundation, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the release of the Indispensable Institution, Taking the Measure of Community College Workforce Education, a study of credit and non-credit workforce programs at community and technical colleges across the U.S. Some 38% of the nation's community colleges participated, making this one of the largest surveys of community college workforce education and training ever. We are excited to share the findings with all of you here today and looking forward to the comments from our speakers and the conversation with our panelists. This project began 3 years ago and is motivated by three realities. First is the growing recognition of the importance of occupational short-term credentials and associate degrees. There are 36 million adults with some college but no degree, and more than 50 million adults with only high school diplomas. All of them face the challenge of reskilling and upskilling to succeed in today's rapidly changing economy, which requires post-high school credentials. And when asked what they're looking for from higher education, what these adults tell us is that they are interested in programs that are short-term, affordable, flexible, and job-focused. It is also the case that employers tell us that they are increasingly interested in hiring workers with short-term credentials tied to in-demand skills. Second is the fact that while there is, on the one hand, increasing awareness of the importance of these programs, there is, on the other hand, limited data about community college credit and non-credit workforce programs. We hardly know how many students are enrolled in these programs, not to mention other basic facts about the availability, size, and quality of these programs. And third, we are also motivated by Lumina's focus on equity. We know that a large number of African American, Latino, Hispanic, and Native American students enroll in these programs, but without better data, we are unable to understand how effective these programs are in creating a more equitable labor market. What most often comes to mind, especially when trying to understand non-credit workforce programs, is one of those medieval maps with a picture of a dragon or a sea monster on the uncharted region where potential dangers were thought to exist. We knew that we needed a better map to understand the landscape of community college workforce programs, but in 2018, we couldn't foresee just how important it would be in a world impacted by COVID. Today, there is a much greater interest in short-term credentials, and with this research, we're able to take the first steps needed to replace the dragons and sea monsters on our map with the actual details of the terrain of job-focused education and training at our community colleges. To kick things off, we're going to hear from Glenn Hubbard, former chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, and then Tamar Jacoby, president and CEO of Opportunity America, will present the findings from the report. After Tamar, we'll hear from Kim Hunter-Reid, Louisiana's Commissioner of Higher Education, and we'll end with a panel discussion with Harrison Keller, Commissioner of the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, Ann Kress, President of Northern Virginia Community Colleges, and will be moderated by journalist Paul Fain. Let's hear from Glenn.
So Glenn Hubbard really needs no introduction, one of the nation's most distinguished economists. He was formerly chairman of President George W. Bush's Council of Economic Advisors. He's currently a professor at Columbia Business School. Glenn, thank you so much for joining me.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
So let's start. I know you have you're here really as an economist to talk about the importance of community colleges. But before we get to that, you have a personal connection to community colleges. Tell us about your dad.
Well, my father taught for years in a community college. I grew up in Central Florida. He taught in a school called Lake Sumter Community College, taught English, and told stories all the time about the transforming power of the school, of taking people who might have come from families who hadn't gone to college, people seeking basic skills, and of course, people wanting to transfer to four-year universities in the state. But community college always struck me from those days on as places that were very versatile in meeting needs of people and of communities.
Yeah, great. So now you're grown up, put your economist hat on. As an economist, you look at America, you think about what institutions are important, you think about what we need as the future of work comes at us faster and faster. What is it about community colleges that jumps out at you? Why are you interested in them? Why do they jump out?
Well, there are many structural changes going on in America, and community colleges aren't the answer to everything, but they're critically important. So let's start with the basic economic changes that are happening from technological change and globalization. In recent decades, those have been the big disruptors of our economy and of the labor market. They require different skills than the economy might have required when I was a very young person. They also require people to upskill and change skills over time. The notion that you're going to go into a pathway and stay there forever just isn't really there. Community colleges are built for purpose for exactly that. They do two things very well. One is developing skills and imparting those skills. And second, mapping those skills into the local economy and local labor market. The country is dotted with great success stories of community college leaders who have worked with local business leaders and local governments to figure out how to get people ready for work. So four-year universities, great research universities, they're all important part of America's knowledge powerhouse. But if the goal is dealing with globalization and technological change, community colleges are really on the front lines, and there's more. The COVID-19 pandemic has triggered a major reallocation of business and of human capital in the economy. Community colleges are needed now more than ever. So the critical thing is to figure out, what do they do well? How do you get the resources to help them do well? That's a huge policy question. And then how do you measure whether taxpayers are getting their money's worth?
So we'll come to the resources in a second. Let me ask you one question before we go there. Who are we talking about? So, most people, you say college students, they imagine some fresh-faced, 18-year-old. Who do community colleges serve, and who are they going to need to serve increasingly in years ahead?
It's great. I am the author of a freshman econ textbook, Principles of Economics. And I know from years of writing a pretty successful book that the idea of a college student on a leafy green, that's not many people's college. It's some people's, but it's not nearly everybody. It's certainly not a community college student. Community college students are often older. They're often holding jobs, some with family responsibilities. So they're juggling. And when you talk about preparing people for work, it's not just the imparting of skills sitting in an economics lecture hall or a college algebra or whatever the course happens to be. It's helping people cope and compete and complete their education. The returns that people rightly point to from either community college 2-year degrees or 4-year degrees are about completion. But part of the story, of course, is the lack of completion in both 2-year and 4-year institutions. So we need to do more to help those schools retain the students, not just get them.
But it might be completion not of a full degree, right? It might be completion of a credential that enables you to go into the labor market.
Absolutely. I mean, often people think of a 2-year institution like a community college as a segue to a 4-year baccalaureate. First of all, the 2-year degree itself can be a pathway to many promising middle-income jobs in today's economy. And second, as you said, certification can also be valuable. I mentioned earlier that many community colleges are very good at working with local businesses. If a large employer says, I need people who can do this, then a community college can work with that company or a local government economic development authority to develop people with those skills. It really is where the rubber meets the road.
Okay, last question. It's great. What is your answer about resources and about policy? What should change? What's a quick, short answer for what should change for policy?
For economists, short answers are always about supply and demand. And that's the answer here. So most policymakers, or at least many, are focused on the demand side, free tuition, lower costs to people. It's certainly a laudable goal to help people manage their education costs. That doesn't, however, get resources into community colleges, many of which have seen their budgets decline relative to their 4-year peers in states. So we need to boost supply. That's not a new idea. It was Abraham Lincoln's idea in the Morrill Act in the land-grant colleges, the idea that if we increase capacity to train people for an emerging economy, their skills can grow and blossom, and so too their incomes. It worked for the land-grant colleges. It can work here. And I would hope Congress would consider that.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tamar Jacoby. I'm president of Opportunity America. And this is the part of the program where I give you a quick look at what we found with the survey. So my presentation is heavy on numbers, so I thought I'd start with a human face, with a student. There is no typical community college student. That's part of what we found with our survey. But this is Arona and in our slide, and she's a pretty good example of one important kind of learner served by community colleges that's often overlooked. When Arona arrived in the US, the only job she could find was as a nanny. People in her church told her that healthcare was a good field in the US, growing field, and that a community college could help her get a good job, that the training would be fast, and that the college knew employers. So she was in a hurry. She had no time for a degree. She went to the community college and she signed up for a non-credit program. Short, standalone, skills-focused training, 4 months at night and on the weekends, no degree. At the end of 4 months, she got her dream job as a medical assistant. And the segue to the survey, what we found with the survey, we think there are 3.7 million learners like Arona, generally older, job-focused, enrolled in non-credit programs designed for learners who are more interested in skills than in academic credentials. But the federal government keeps no data on students like that. They're all but invisible to policymakers in most states. And one of the main reasons we decided to field the survey, as Chauncey pointed out, was to find out more about them. So I'll come back to that in a minute. What I'd like to do first is give us a little context. So next slide. So Arona's circumstances are unique. She's an immigrant, but the changing economy, as both Glenn and Chauncey pointed out, are driving many different kinds of learners toward more job-focused education. Technological change is driving growing demand for skilled technical workers. There are fewer and fewer jobs for people with just a high school diploma, and that's driving traditional college-age students to look for skills. Meanwhile, workers displaced by automation, older workers, also need short, targeted job-focused training. And as technological change accelerates, workers at all education levels are going to need lifelong learning. And the point is that the changing economy is driving new and different kinds of demand for post-secondary education. The good news is that community colleges are positioned to meet this growing demand. Many community colleges have long experience providing job-focused education, and they're the only institution with the reach and scale to provide training for any significant number of learners. So if you look at the figure here, community colleges educate more people than coding boot camps, apprenticeship programs, and government job training combined. There's about 18,000 people in boot camps, a little over 200,000 in government job training, and 10.5 million at community colleges. So, okay, so we have this new reality. We have community colleges. Why do we need a survey? And the main reason for me is that some of the most exciting innovation in higher ed is taking place at community colleges. Most of it innovation to keep up with the way the economy is changing. Short form non-credit courses, more intensive employer engagement, work-based learning, as Chauncey pointed out, new kinds of alternative credentials that help students make the transition to the labor market. The last few years have been a time of incredible innovation. But we don't know how widespread that innovation is. We don't know if that's just a pocket here and a pocket there, or if it's really spreading across the country. And so that's kind of what we wanted. That's one of the main things we want to find out with the survey. And it's not just researchers who need to know that, right? Policymakers need to know whether the innovation is reaching their state. They need to use that information to make decisions about funding. And innovative educators need models and benchmarks. So this is the survey. This slide is the survey at a glance. It was open to 1,259 public two-year institutions, all the community and technical colleges in America. There were 57, this was not how's your Instacart guide, this was a deep dive, 57 multiple choice and open-ended questions. We were in the field for what felt like a lifetime, from mid-October 2020 to March 2021, and we got a very robust and gratifying 38% response rate, thanks to the many people who helped us at allied associations and in the States and elsewhere. So one of the biggest challenges we faced was really just getting a grip on what happens at community colleges. they meet so many different kinds of needs for so many different kinds of learners. My metaphor is a Swiss Army knife. And that's one of the reasons I think that many people misunderstand community colleges and overlook their strengths. They don't quite get which part of the Swiss Army knife is really the important part. And so these are just three different dimensions, if you will. Community college students can be job focused or not job focused, right? They can be learning welding or nursing, or they can be learning liberal arts and sociology, job focused, not job focused. Then a very different dimension, related but different, these are distinct, is credit and non-credit. Credit are students who are aiming for academic credentials. Non-credit are students who are more interested in skills. And then there's the big age span that you see at most community colleges, from traditional college age 18-year-olds to 25-year-olds, 35-year-olds, 45-year-olds. We'll see a little more about that in a minute. So here's putting some numbers to those different dimensions. And now we're really getting into our findings. So the donut here on the left, that's the first dimension, right? Job focused versus not job focused. And this is our sample. This is the 38% of colleges that responded to the survey. But what you see here is that job focus predominates. It's a close call. It's 54% to 46%. But in the college as a whole, more students, credit and non-credit, are in job focused programs than in non-job focused programs. The donut in the middle, the gray donut, is a different dimension, right? This is the credit versus non-credit. And you see it's a distinct different thing than the job focused versus not job focused. They don't line up. Credit, it's about 65, we believe, about 65% of all student enrollments at community colleges. And non-credit is about 35%. A robust third of the students are like Arona, the part of the iceberg beneath the sea that we don't know anything about. The donut on the right combines those two perspectives. And again, what you have here is the solid color. That's the credit side of the college. And again, you can see that side too is divided about 50-50, half and half, a little more workforce, non-workforce. A little more heavily workforce, but there's a lot of liberal arts and sociology going on over here. Divided about half and half, that's the credit side. And the non-credit side is the striped. And again, there too, here the workforce is a little more robust. It's closer to 60% of what actually goes on there, 57%. So the whole college is really four pieces of a donut, but it's interesting and complex overlays, not as simple as non-credit equals workforce by any means. So in designing the survey, as Chauncey said, and I've said, we were especially interested in figuring out who these non-credit students are, what's in that black box. We all know about them. We know it's an important part of community colleges, but who are they? What can we learn about them? So this is just a few of our top findings. Our first finding, which I think is going to surprise a lot of people, is the absolute number, the 3.7 million number. There are other numbers out there, most of them more than the main one that's used, more than a decade, more than 12 years old, is a little higher than this. And again, this is extrapolated from 38% of colleges, but we believe nationwide there are 3.7 million non-credit students. In the middle of the slide, we look at the non-credit students and we look at what kind of program they're in. So once upon a time, I think not that long ago, a lot of what happened on the non-credit side of the college was really what we now call recreational. French cooking, photography, walking tours of Charlotte. That's now down to less than 20%, 18% in our sample. And remedial has also, in many states, is a big part of what happens has traditionally been a big part of what happens in the non-credit side. That too has shrunk to about less than 20%, about 19% we think now. The lion's share of what's going on the non-credit side is job focused, 57% of the enrollments. The donut on the right, the last thing on this slide, is just non-credit workforce students, right? So this is just students like Arona. But what's shocking here is look at all this red. All of this red, 3/4 of the donut, are students over 25. You've got students about 30% of the, well, let's see, I'll leave it to you to read the numbers. They're a little small from where I am, but the point is 75% of non-credit workforce learners are older than 25. They're adults returning to college to get ready to learn the skills to get a job or a better job. So this next slide is one of these slides where the picture is actually worth 1,000 words. Community colleges are regulated and funded by states, so national averages can be wildly misleading. And this is a picture of state variation. This is non-credit workforce students as a share of all community college students. Remember, nationally, the average is about 20%, but look at the variation in the states. We go from less than 5% down here up to more than 60% up here. And this is true of many, many of our questions. There is no uniform national picture of community colleges. What you have to look at is state by state. So now I just want to look quickly at just two of the innovations that we explored in the survey. Remember, a lot of what we wanted to do was see how widespread innovation is. So this is collaborating with employers. And of course, you know, there can be no effective workforce education without input from employers. They provide information on industry trends. They help educators develop curriculum. They give feedback on graduate skills. And these are just a couple of the many data points in the survey. We asked colleges how many employer partners they had. And this is not that meaningful number, again, because it's an average, but the average, they said 191 employer partners. What this masks is a wide range of intensity. Some community college partnerships with employers are very meaningful. They talk every week, they compare notes on students, they plan curriculum together. Some community college partnerships with employers are, you know, pretty casual and pretty perfunctory. They meet once a year over lunch and talk about generalities. And so, you know, a lot of what we tried to do with the survey was dig a little deeper. What is the range of intensity within this 191 or however many partners you have? And we use a number of ways to get at that, but what you're looking at here, the donut on the right, is the percent of employer partners who provide work-based learning. That's not the only measure of intensity. It may not be the best measure of intensity, but it's one that's hard to fudge. Like, it's not, you're not sort of asking employers how good is your relationship, and colleges, excuse me, and giving them a chance to say good. You're asking them an actual fact. Do your employer partners offer work-based learning? And what we found is that about 36% of employer partners offer work-based learning, which is a pretty good number in my view. Or, you know, it's a place to start anyway. This is innovation number 2, and this is what Chauncey teed up so nicely. These are credentials issued by an external body, not the college. Credentials based on external tests, credentials designed to signal that learners have job-related skills. And the red is are the share of students earning that kind of credential, industry certifications or other third-party certifications. And what's interesting, we don't know whether these two bars are overlapping or additive, but what we can say is that between 1/4 and 1/3 of non-credit workforce students earn competency-based non-college credentials. There's still room to grow, 1/4 and 1/3, but again, I find those numbers pretty encouraging. The innovation is spreading. And by the way, this points back to, you know, why we hope the survey will be useful to colleges and to states, right? Not just this number, but a lot of our numbers. You know, we hope that educators and state education officials will look at their state, their college, and they'll say, you know, are we at 26%? Are we at the national average? And if not, why not? And what can we do about it? And if we're doing better than 26%, well, good on us, but what comes next? You know, we hope the survey will be a tool for innovation, to advance innovation, not just a nice research project. So I'm coming into the home stretch here. This is one of our most troubling findings, and it brings me back to Arona, our student. She qualified as a medical assistant, and for now that is a dream job for her, right? But it's not going to be her dream job forever. She's already thinking about being a nurse. In fact, she said to me, why not doctor? And to do that, she'll need to go back to school. But when she goes back to school, she doesn't want to have to repeat the non-credit training she's already done. She wants college credit for it. But look what we found. it's very, very difficult for students like her to leverage their non-credit learning for college credit at most colleges. So the figure is a little bit confusing. This isn't these percentages aren't shares of students, they're shares of colleges. These are shares of colleges nationwide where non-credit workforce students can leverage most or all of their prior learning for college credit. And look, that happens only at about 20% of colleges. So there's a lot of room. This is really important innovation gulf that needs to be bridged, important innovation that needs to spread further, a lot of work to be done. This is the last data slide. We're still focusing on non-credit workforce education. And the question is, who pays for it? And of course, these are numbers that start to point to policy, right? State and federal policy. As a practical matter, students like Arona are ineligible for federal financial aid. So the question is, who picks up the tab? Some states have funding for non-credit programs. You can see over here, the state shares about 24%, although they usually fund it less generously than they fund credit programs. Federal job training dollars, WIOA funding down here in the light blue, 8%, not very much of the cost. You know, there are people in Washington who say we don't need to make Pell Grants, expand Pell Grant eligibility. WIOA covers it. No, it does not. WIOA is not covering these programs. Darker blue is employers. Employers cover about twice as much as WIOA, as the government job training, but far from the lion's share. And the bottom line is that the burden is on students. Nationwide, 36% of the cost for non-credit workforce education falls to learners. Again, there's huge state variation. So in about a third of the states, it's half or more of the cost. And in 5 states, it's more than 2/3 of the cost. You know, in my view, this is a place where we need a lot of work, political work. So I'm out of time. This is just the tip of the iceberg of our findings, but I want to get out of the way and let the rest of the program continue. These are some of our products. There's a policy brief, an interactive data portal, individualized reports for participating colleges, state-level reports for state education agencies, and all of this is available, findable here at opportunityamericaonline.org/cc survey. Of course, we're also eager to help you get your hands on whatever data you want, so don't hesitate to reach out if you can't find what you need on the portal or can't figure out how to manipulate it to get the results you're looking for. And so with that, I'm going to take off my presenter's hat and bring back the Master of Ceremonies. And to introduce the next segment, we have a wonderful short video from Louisiana Commissioner of Higher Education, Kim Hunter-Reid, and that will be followed by the panel.
As you know, everywhere we go, everywhere we are, we see the signs of help wanted, trying to bring a COVID economy back, thinking about how do we make sure the education to employment pipeline is robust and persistent and precise. And this is where the community colleges come in. They are America's front door, America's talent development hub. This is what they do each and every day. And so I think it's very important for us in Louisiana, in America, to understand the value of the community colleges as a reskilling and upskilling tool for America, a place where people can find an opportunity, can understand how to map their aptitude and interest to the world of work, can get real work experience while they're on the training, in the training programs that we do each and every day. I think this is the potential of the community colleges. What we must do is to make sure that we understand that there's honor in all pathways, that there's not this academic snobbery around our math is better than yours, or this English is better than that. We need to say talent development is an all-in approach. Community colleges have a special way of getting this done. They've done it well, they're proven. And we need to make sure more students understand that this is a path for them. We need to make it affordable. We need to make it accessible. We need to make it portable. And we need to make sure that policymakers, parents, students, jobs, business, and industry understand the power and the potential of our community colleges, and that we knit this work together and drive an economy that allows more people to have opportunity. Education is about opportunity, and we need to make sure that opportunity exists for everyone. And for many students, the community college represents that opportunity, but not for enough of our students. And so we need to open doors wider. We need to make sure that we're having robust conversations about how to get there, and then we need to do it.
Hello, I'm Paul Fain. I'm your moderator for this panel. Thanks for joining me. I am joined by Ann Kress, President of the Northern Virginia Community College. Hello, Ann. Harrison Keller, Commissioner of Higher Education for the state of Texas. Harrison. And as you saw before, Chauncey Lennon, Vice President for Learning and Work at Lumina. Just a quick technical note, I'm going to leave some time for questions, so get thinking and add them in the chat, and we'll get to them at the end of the panel here. But let's start with President Kress. If you could set the stage here, the title of this is Untapped Potential. Could you give us a sense of what NOVA is doing and what it could be doing?
Sure, and thank you so much for this important convening. I think when you look at Northern Virginia Community College, just to frame it for those of you who have joined us today, we're a large institution. We have over 70,000 credit students, and when you add in the non-credit students that we're largely talking about this afternoon, it's over 90,000 students that we serve. And so you can see that delta, right? That about 20,000 plus students who are in these non-credit pathways. And what we're doing right now is working with some really innovative programs in the Commonwealth of Virginia, one of which goes back to 2016. It's called Fast Forward. And so Fast Forward is a way for the state to incentivize community colleges to offer these in-demand non-credit pathways that lead to industry-recognized credentials. And it does so by funding a third of the program, and then the second third to the institution when that student does complete and earn that credential. And then the student has 1/3 of the cost of the program, far less than he or she might in another setting. And then that third can also be covered by some programs in the state, such as the Reemploying Virginians program, the new G3 program, which is a workforce scholarship, or other financial aid opportunities. So we've seen those enrollments grow. In fact, just to give folks who are listening a sense of the post-pandemic demand, enrollment in those programs is up by over 100% year on year. So think about that when you're thinking about the new economy and where students, especially adults, because about 2/3 of these students are older than 25, where they're seeing their future, it's in these short-term credentials. And an independent review of Fast Forward across the state found that about 25% or a 25% increase in income for the vast majority of participants, but a 28% increase for individuals in the lowest income bracket. So NOVA's doing a lot. I can talk a lot more. I want to give my colleagues some time to get in there as well. But one thing we do see is that there's a growing demand for earning and learning at the same time through apprenticeship programs. And we just launched a brand new apprenticeship with AT&T that really is aimed at the national security of our country and looking at cybersecurity professionals who can achieve clearances to work with national security agencies. So lots of innovation here at NOVA.
Thanks, Ann. I'm going to turn to Dr. Keller now. We heard that making a generalization about higher education is impossible, including the community college sector. You've got a big state you're overseeing. Can you give us a sense of what we know about the programs that are aimed at job-focused students and working learners and what we don't?
Yeah, so we have a big state. We have about 1.3 million students enrolled in our higher education institutions, about half of them in community colleges. And one of the things that I would highlight is that we have a lot of work to do improving our data collection within our institutions as well as across our institutions on what happens on the workforce education side. So when I talk to presidents and chancellors across our state, that's one of the common denominators is that we've had this traditional bright line between what happens on the for-credit side and what happens on the continuing education or the workforce education side. And so we haven't collected data in ways that we need to be able to guide decisions. So I think that's one of the one of the areas that's ripe for innovation, and where we do see some of the colleges doing some really important and exciting work to break down that traditional barrier and start to talk about, well, let's make those credentials more readily convertible to the credit side. So these short-term credentials could be stackable on the way to other kinds of degrees and credentials. We're actually focusing some resources along those lines here in Texas. So some of the governor's emergency education relief dollars that came as part of the CARES Act were allocated to higher education by Governor Abbott and the legislative leadership. And actually just in the last couple of weeks, we've dropped a request for applications where we're focusing $25 million initially on building capacity for short-term programs within our community colleges, with emphasis on those high-demand programs, ideally that are credentials that are stackable.
And just for folks who don't know, I mean, Texas is at the head of the class for collecting data generally in higher education. So interesting that even in your state, you have need there. Chauncey, when I hear about short-term credential programs that really look the most promising, Virginia comes up top of the list. Any thoughts about the program design or the way they've approached this that you want to respond to?
Sure. I think, a couple things to keep in mind here. As Ann said, one of them is thinking about these innovative sort of financing models, right? That you're going to split the cost between sort of the institution, the state, and the student, right? That we've got to think of new ways to make these programs accessible and to share the cost burden. I think the other thing Virginia has done is really think about the kind of sector approach, really building the kinds of depth and alignment with industry. Virginia was one of the first states that actually incentivized sort of sector partnerships to get industries to come together and better identify their shared skill needs and then signal those over to the community college system. And then I think a third thing is that, there has been this, for lack of a better term, kind of positive PR. The state has taken a lot of pride in describing these programs and promoting them and sort of showing them to be an important part of the kind of education pathways it wants to offer. And I think when we look at those three factors, if we saw more states doing one, two, or all of those, I think we'd be headed on the right road at a much faster clip.
And to that last point, I wonder about getting the word out to students who could benefit from these programs. Marketing is not cheap. And, it does seem like Virginia has done a good job of alerting folks that they could benefit from giving these credential programs a try. How have you done that?
Well, I think it's a good question because one of the things we've seen is that demand has grown year on year. So part of this is working with community-based organizations. It's also working, honestly, with school districts, helping them to understand. I think Kim Hunter-Reid talked about that all those pathways have value. So really reinforcing that. And then really working with business and industry. I think Tamar talked about the comprehensive community college and all of the tools that we have to bring to the table. So just really quickly, we had a discussion recently with some folks who run long-term care facilities. And obviously there's a shortage of nurses and CNAs and LPNs across the board right now in this country. And so as they look to the future in an aging population, they're trying to imagine how can they grow the workforce. And so they initially approached us with their understanding, which was, the one path forward was to have RNs. But in having a discussion with these 5 or 6 industry partners, they realized, well, they also need CNAs and they really need a lot of LPNs, but, they were looking at a horizon that was quite long. And what we were able to say is there's another pathway here. We can go non-credit with some of these. They end in the same licensures. It's a different program. It's structured differently. You're also going to be able to two things that are very important. One is to continue to diversify your workforce. What we see to some of the data in the survey is that about 2/3 of the students who come through our non-credit programs are students of color. The second thing they were going to be able to do was to grow and invest in their own existing workforce. So to that concept of laddering, we could help them see how they could take folks who might be in food service or in janitorial services who might have the aptitude or the interest to move into CNA, and then have those CNAs move into LPNs, and then potentially have those LPNs move into RNs. So we could continue to build this ladder where people are not stuck in a terminal credential that doesn't go anywhere, but really does continue to advance them. And they were incredibly excited because, quite frankly, they had never thought of this before. And then, to Chauncey's point, we could bring in the state's assistance with Fast Forward and with the new G3 funds, which are workforce scholarships, and say, we could help you invest in your workforce. We could help grow this regional workforce because it benefits all of us in Northern Virginia. So I do think having those discussions is incredibly important.
Harrison, you mentioned the likely demand increase for short-term credentials in Texas. Can you talk a little bit about which industries, which fields you see the most potential, and how colleges can best work with employers, as Ann discusses there, to make sure that these programs take off?
Yeah, we're seeing the demand across a broad range of credentials, from commercial truck drivers and electricians to of course, frontline healthcare workers on everybody's mind. Folks with digital skills are in high demand. And we have an acute shortage of folks who can work in software development, folks who can work in cybersecurity. And also, one of the issues that keeps coming up again and again across every sector that I talk to is around data analytics. Folks who can work with data, who can consume statistics, who can visualize data in ways that are going to be consumable. So we have a lot of work to do across the spectrum to meet these demands. And a lot of that we can do effectively through these focused short-term programs that help people reskill and upskill. That's very important for helping people get back on their feet, getting back into the economy. Or what we've seen is that our state economy and our national economy have the changes that were already underway have accelerated faster than anyone had anticipated. So a lot of folks are finding that to advance in their careers or even to get a similar job in the same industry, they're going to need additional training. And so these short-term credentials delivered through our community colleges are going to be critical for us to be able to stay competitive and help folks participate in and benefit from our Texas recovery.
Absolutely. Chauncey, you know well, stackability is key to making these short-term credentials not track folks into entry-level jobs without potential advancement. What do you see as some of the biggest barriers to making that happen at scale, which really hasn't happened, I think, except for a few isolated examples? How do we get there?
So I think in some ways, the first thing when you think about this question is to maybe take a step back and recognize that, all credentials don't operate the same way. There's a lot of variation by industry. And there's important differences between certificates and certifications. Certifications typically being awarded by industry or other third parties. Those are often tied to very specific kinds of occupations in more regulated sectors. And certifications often go hand in hand with a license. And so I think one way to address this challenge is help people understand earlier on what kind of job and what kind of credential you're headed towards, because some of them actually are more of a kind of one and done, but that one and done is tied to a more secure career trajectory. Other kinds of situations, other kinds of certificates in particular, we see real challenges. We see large number of programs that have very limited ROI, if any ROI. And we know we have too many people, especially women and people of color, crowded into those programs. So we have to do a much better job earlier on helping people understand that all credentials are not the same. They don't behave the same way when you get to the labor market, and they do not have the same sort of value in the labor market. So I think that's one key thing. If we want people to then think about how they keep going, what we need to do is help them understand from the earliest days that credentials are often, process over time. Sometimes the industry is organized around a credential ladder, and people have to understand that they're going to have to keep going with those credentials. If you want just, a one-time credential, there's other industries where that's more of the case, but we do very little right now to help people appreciate the kinds of differences and variation here. So I think we've got to sort of step back and reframe how we help people think about credential choices and what programs they enroll in.
It's the right time to reframe for sure. So it looks like you all are already submitting good questions. I'm going to start just throwing them to the panel, so keep them coming. First question here: what can government and policymakers can do to encourage more uptake of industry certifications? Long-term problem. Anne, Harrison, either of you want to take a first crack at that?
So a couple of things. So one is, that's come up a couple of times in these discussions, is that it's important for us at the state level to collect better data on the kinds of credentials being awarded, so we can connect that with the other kind of rich data we have on earnings and on what's happening in our educational pipeline. So we're partnered with the Texas Workforce Commission and working right now on standing up a state credential repository to help us move in that direction. That's going to be a critical piece of it. But again, I want to underline a really critical point that Chauncey made on the college and career advising front. So we actually did some polling in Texas, focused on the folks with some college and no credential, and asked them what the barriers were to re-enrolling. And what they told us was that costs of programs were a barrier, but on par with what they said about costs were concerns and barriers related to advising. So folks might know they need additional education, but they're not sure what kind of education they might need or how that would translate into a better job. And so we need to focus resources to help people have a better, clear line of sight to a good job. So not just to earn a credential and increase educational attainment for the state and that kind of thing, but to connect that to the kinds of opportunities that it creates for individuals, for communities, for the state. That's an area of work we're also focusing resources on here in Texas around college and career advising. But I will say, drawing on these kinds of insights that you get from the Opportunity America work, from other important strands of work around the country. I think we've got a lot of work to do just to make those career paths more visible for folks.
Well, Anne, please go ahead.
I would just add funding, right? One of the things when we look back at our own data at NOVA around those fast forward programs in Virginia, we can see that when more state aid came in to support student enrollment, our enrollments became more diverse, right? Because we need to recognize that many of the students who would most benefit from quality short-term programs that are directly connected to local labor market needs in sustaining wage pathways, that they don't have the money to front for these programs. And the vast majority of them are not currently eligible for any sort of federal financial aid. So I think reimagining some of the federal financial aid that could come to students is going to be critical. And I want to go back to something that Kim Hunter-Reid said and really underscore it, is that we're not just talking about skilling, we're talking about reskilling and upskilling. So if you're someone who's 28 years old and 10 years ago, you started college and you got a degree in field X. And now in order to stay employed in field X, you need to continue to upskill and reskill. And you've already gone through all of your Pell Grants and you don't have any aid that's sitting there waiting for you. What are you going to do? You can say maybe your employer should help you, but we can also see what's happened with a lot of those research and development and professional development and training dollars at the corporate level. So there is a huge social and economic benefit to keeping people skilled and reskilled and upskilled. So you would think that there could be some federal opportunity to direct more aid to the programs that can demonstrate quality.
Chauncey, anything you want to add to that? Yeah.
Sure. So, I think one additional dimension here is that let's remember that community colleges, they were designed as universal access institutions. It was the original, if you build it, they will come design. And that meant not just that there wasn't really much of a robust outreach muscle, but it meant they weren't really thinking about adults, right? It was kind of, again, a universal access. We're in a very different point in time where community colleges now, the task in front of them is reaching out, to these 80 million plus adults who either have started college or haven't, but need to go back. And we don't really know, we don't have the right capacity, for lack of a better word, to market in effective ways. We don't invest in community colleges. We don't give them the resources to do that. We don't have the knowledge base. And so I think another piece of this is we have to understand the different kinds of messages, the different ways of messaging that we're going to need to adapt to really speak to all these different, right? Adults are not one kind of person. We've got to speak to them in different ways that reflect who they are and their experiences. But that's, I think we've seen some innovation, but we have a long way to go to help community colleges really be much more strategic about how they go out and engage all the students who could benefit from these programs.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I'm going to go to another audience question. I like this one. How do we help community colleges distinguish between perfunctory and meaningful employer partners? Let's start with Ann there. I mean, Nova does a lot of work with a lot of meaningful employer partners. How do you know when you've got one on the line that's going to be a good relationship?
Well, so I'm just going to tell a quick story because over the past few years, we've completely redone the way that we even design our program advisory boards with local employers, because what we found was that we had people who were giving us advice about some of our career pathway programs who never hired any of our students. So I think that's one tell. You want to work with folks who are really interested in hiring your students, who are really interested in the quality and the outcomes of the programs that you're talking about. People, when they sit down with community colleges, we want to make sure that they have our students' best interests at heart, as well as their own workforce needs. I'll put it that way. Then you're also looking for partners who are willing to invest. Sometimes it's dollars, right, to support students. For example, in the story I shared about the long-term care facilities, those will be expensive programs to run. And so for Nova to begin to gear in that direction, we're going to need some external support. But you also want folks who are going to invest their time and their energy into making sure the curriculum aligns with the outcomes that they're looking for, helping us by giving us that feedback loop on the programs. So, it's one thing to come to the table and just throw off a few comments. And it's another to say, as we have, for example, with our data center operations programs, 3/4 of the world's data runs through Northern Virginia. And as that industry continues to grow, we have industry partners who have loaned their employees as instructors. And obviously we're paying them, but they're giving them the time to work for us. So, you're really looking for somebody who's saying, not just I need this workforce, but I'm willing to work alongside you to make sure that we have a well-trained, well-qualified workforce, that this isn't just a first job, it's a career pathway, and I'm willing to invest in these folks going forward as well.
Harrison, any thoughts to add there?
Just one thing that I'd underline when I'm reflecting on Ann's important insights there is that, when I think about some of the most powerful partnerships that I've seen and that like at San Jacinto Community College on the Houston Ship Channel or Del Mar and Corpus Christi, one of the things that stands out to me is that they have employer partnerships where the employers are willing to roll up their sleeves and help contribute to the design of programs and of curriculum, and also to create different kinds of work-based learning opportunities for students, and apprenticeships and internships that can be integrated with the design of those programs. I think that that's one of the most exciting areas of innovation that we need to lean into, because we're not doing enough yet to integrate those work-based learning experiences into the design of our programs. I think that so one of the marks of both the community college innovators and the strong employer partners is that they they roll up their sleeves and work on creating those opportunities together.
Chauncey, I've got to ask, you've been watching this for a long time. I don't want to sound like a Pollyanna here, but it does feel like I'm making a generalization, but that employers are more engaged. You know, it's the tight labor market, it's the need to diversify. But how optimistic are you that you're going to see more from that side, more of the sort of investment of time and money that Ann talked about?
Well, look, I think we certainly should be glad to see this interest, right? There's no world in which we should sort of not treat it as real. I think the real question is recognizing that, you know, at the end of the day, community colleges need to be kind of as savvy and sophisticated, have as much market intelligence about different industries as the employers themselves, sometimes more, right? Because any one employer has his own set of parochial interests that may not capture what's happening in the industry. And so it's another thing we're asking community colleges to do that they were not designed to do, which is to be, in some sense, the lead economic development actor across a span of industries. And when we think about some of the questions, going back to even Glenn Hubbard, about how the investments we're going to be making in community colleges, where that money should go, some of it needs to go to building the kind of capacity at institutions to play this essential role in tying together employers and industries to the training pipelines that community colleges represent. It's great that we have employers sort of more eager and interested and increasingly, hopefully, interested in funding some of this work. But ultimately, what will sustain it, I think, is the capacity, the ability of the community colleges to really be the sort of quarterback of this team.
We do ask a lot of the community college sector, more so than ever. So as a last question, for folks who are listening in the policymaker sphere, what can they do? What can government do to help community colleges bridge between credit and non-credit programs, if anything? The last administration in Washington took this on a little bit. The idea of trying to, national accreditation, a lot of ways to try to make prior learning assessment a bit more acceptable to four-year institutions. But Ann or Harrison, anything that you'd like to see in the next year or so?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Harrison.
Two or three things. So one is that I'm excited about the work that we're doing to modernize our data infrastructure so we can reflect back more actionable intelligence to the colleges. We have 50 different community colleges in Texas. We've got Dallas College that they're going to have 60 or 70,000 students, down to small colleges that are smaller than a lot of high schools here in Texas. So there's a huge range of capabilities and resources within these institutions. So providing that data to the institutions so they can play the kind of role that Chauncey lays out. That's something that strategic investments from state and federal policymakers can really be important for. There's a lot of brush clearing that we need to do on the financial aid side in particular. We're making some strategic investments around financial aid for students in these short-term programs. But as Ann mentioned, there's a lot of work that we need to do so that we've got more predictable financial aid available for workforce programs. So those would be a couple of the things that would be at the top of my list. The last thing would just be strategic investment in these colleges. We have not prioritized and built the kind of workforce training capabilities that we need to meet the demands of this moment. So that hopefully this is a time where the urgency of the moment is going to push us to make strategic investments in our community colleges, especially around reskilling and upskilling.
And we've got about 30 seconds left. Any quick last thoughts?
Sure. I would just go back to that notion of federal investment, and I'll just throw out one sector. When you look at the infrastructure bill, the reality is you could pass that tomorrow and you would not have a workforce that could enact most of those projects. Those are typically short-term programs, and there simply aren't enough of them. So you need to invest in the capacity of the institutions to offer these short-term programs as well. That's incredibly important and has, I think, gone neglected for a while.
Well, I want to thank all three of you. Fantastic. You covered a lot of ground in 30 minutes there. I'm going to turn it back to Tamar, but a virtual round of applause for you.
Wow, what a thoughtful conversation. And pointing us at the end, right where we needed to be pointed, institutional aid. If you enjoyed today's session, there's a companion event in 2 weeks. Please join us for that. It's going to be a little different, a deeper dive into this question that Harrison keeps pointing us to, data. How can data really help us drive some of this innovation? You know, data can sound like a theory topic, but we're not going to get the innovation we need without better data. I think there's a slide that's going to point you to the companion event, non-credit workforce education, using data to drive innovation. We're going to have the director of iPEDS there to talk about iPEDS plans to, or not plans, or thinking about collecting data on non-credit workforce education. So thank you very much to our wonderful panelists, and I hope to see all of you in the audience at the data event on September 28th.